This video is in continuation to part 1 of LifeCycle Hook's method in Angular, and in this session we will cover the remaining part which we could not cover in part 1. So in this video we will implement ngAfterContentInit and ngAfterContentChecked hook methods using @ContentChild and @ContentChildren decorator. Also we will check ngAfterViewInit and ngAfterViewChecked hook methods using @viewChild and @viewChildren decorator. We will also cover what is ngContentElement and what is the difference between @viewChild and @ContentChild decorator.
Hello friends, welcome to our channel WaveTutorials, and you are watching Angular.js full tutorial session. And also I request you to, if you have still not subscribed to our channel, then please subscribe to it and don't forget to click on that notification bell icon. So let's start with today's session.
Every component in Angular has a life cycle which is managed by Angular. A component lifecycle starts when Angular instantiates the component class and renders the component view along with its child view. After instantiate a component or directive, Angular calls the implemented hook method. So we have 8 lifecycle hook methods in Angular, out of which we already covered 4 hook methods in our previous video, which was ngOnChanges, ngOnInit, ngDoCheck, and ngOnDestroy. We covered all the theoretical and practical sessions with these hook methods. So if you have still not watched that video, then please check the link in description. And in this video, we are going to cover ngAfterContentInit, ngAfterContentChecked, ngAfterViewInit, and ngAfterViewChecked. So let's discuss them one by one. So first of all, we will discuss ngAfterViewInit and ngAfterViewChecked. ngAfterViewInit respond after Angular instantiate the component's view and child view, or the view that contain the directives. It called once after the first ngAfterContentChecked executed. Here we are covering the ngAfterViewInit before ngAfterContentChecked because we have to check the difference in between @viewChild and @ContentChild. Now the ngAfterViewChecked respond after Angular checks the component view and child view, or the view that contain the directive. This method actually checked the component's view and their value. It called after ngAfterViewInit and every subsequent ngAfterContentChecked. So to use these lifecycle hook methods, we have to use @viewChild and @viewChildren. Both are used to communicate between components to access the data, and both fetch the first matched or all the child element from the child view template directly to parent component. The only difference between them is @viewChildren provides a list of element reference rather than returning a single reference using query list. And query list is an object that stores a list of items. So let's open Visual Studio Code and see a practical session with ngAfterViewInit and ngAfterViewChecked. So here I am using the same project we used with our part 1 of lifecycle hook method in Angular. So we'll continue with this same project, and to check with ngAfterViewInit and ngAfterViewChecked, we have to create a parent and child relationship between them. So where we will check how a parent component will fetch the properties and methods from child components using @viewChild and @viewChildren. So first of all, let's create two components. One is for a parent and another one is for children. So let's create ngGenerate component with after view parent, and let's skip test for it and also go with inline style. Let's enter. Also create a child component. Instead of parent, let's write child here and create this component as well. Now you can see here that we have created two component, AfterViewChild and AfterViewParent. So first of all, let's call this child component in our parent component, and we will display this parent component on a view. So let's open the source file of child component and copy its selector and paste it here in parent component. Also let's rename it to after view parent. Also let's rename this to after view child. Now let's call this parent component in our root component here. Let's comment the existing code for now. Let's save all the file and open our browser. So you can see here that parent component and child component is showing on our root component, but our requirement is to fetch the property and methods from child component to parent component, and for this we need to use @viewChild and @viewChildren in our parent component. So let's open our AfterViewParent component and declare @viewChild, and also we need to pass the name of the class within this parenthesis. So the name of our child class is AfterViewChild component, which we will pass here and create an object like viewChild, which should be of type AfterViewChild component. And also we need to import this from the component. Now let's create a property in a child component which we will fetch using this object in our parent component. So now let's open our child component and create a property here like name as a after view child. Let's save it and open our parent component, and the next step is we have to implement the ngAfterViewInit LifeCycle Hook method. So for this, let's remove this on init and implement AfterViewInit method, and also we have to import it from Angular core, and let's implement it and try to access the properties of our child component. This dot viewChild dot name. So this way you can access all the properties and methods. So right now we have only single property and one LifeCycle Hook method already created on a child component. Let me show you. You can see here one public property and one LifeCycle Hook method is already implemented here. So let's print this in a console.log and move this to console. Let's save all the changes. Let's open our browser, and you can see that within our ngAfterViewInit, whenever our view initialize, it fetch the name from our child component and printed it in console. So the same way we can use the @viewChildren. So let's implement this as well, viewChildren, and the same way we have to pass the name of class of our child component and create its object viewChildren, which should be of type query list, because in this object we will receive more than one object, or you can say collection of elements or items. So for this, let's write a query list, and which is also of type ngAfterView child component. So we also need to import query list from Angular core. And to fetch all the methods here, first of all, let's create a method here which will return an object from child component. So let's open our child component and create a method here like get employee, and its return type is, for now, let's say any of array type, and let's return, because its return type is of array, then we have to return a array which should return multiple objects. And let's set its key and value as name and set its name as Jack. Also return more than one values, Jack, Mark and Smith. So now we have one public property and two methods in our child component, and we need to access it on a parent component using @viewChildren. So for this, because we are receiving more than one values, then we have to implement and write a for each to fetch all the values. So let's write this like this dot viewChildren dot for each, and let's create a function pointer and fetch all the values in it. Now you can see whenever I type x dot, then it will return you all the properties and methods. Like we can fetch name a single value but within the loop, or we can also fetch the get name. So here we need to fetch the list of employees, so let's use it get employee. Now get employee is already returning an array of objects, then we again need to type for each here, and again we need to create a function pointer, and let's type console.log and display x dot name. So instead of x, to remove the confusion, let's write it as element dot name, and also let's write another console here so that we can check the execution of this LifeCycle Hook methods. Let's save all the files. Let's open our browser again, and you can see that ngAfterViewInit executed, and then AfterViewChild, which is fetched using viewChild, and then the list of our employees Jack, Mark and Smith using this console has been printed here. So within this for each loop you can also print the name, the keyword name, using this function pointer x dot name. Let's save it again, and you can see here that first this console is executed, then this one, then again it printed the name using viewChildren, this one, and then the getEmployee method using for each loop printed all the names received from the child component. So this is the concept of using @viewChild and @viewChildren with LifeCycle Hook method. But still we have pending one LifeCycle Hook method with this, which is ngAfterViewChecked. So let's implement that as well. So for this, our requirement is to check the changes made within our view. So for this, let's create a input type text box in our child component, so that from where we can make any changes and the same changes will get reflected in a parent component. So let's open our child components view and create a input type text box, input type text, and using two-way binding, let's implement ng model and pass a value as name, which is a local variable here you can see that. So whenever we make any changes in this local variable, then the same will get catch by ngAfterViewChecked. So for this, let's implement a method here, a LifeCycle Hook method here, ngAfterViewChecked. So for this, we need to first of all import it. After view checked, and the same way we need to import or implement it here, ng, and to check the previous and current value, let's create a private variable here like previous value. It should be undefined at initial level, and then we will check that the previous value is equal to the current value or not. So for this, let's create a if condition here and check this dot previous value. If it's not equal to this dot view child dot name, then let's print a console here. Value change from this to this dot view child dot name, and value change from this dot previous value. Also, if it's not changed, then also set the previous value with the new value. This dot view child dot name. Let's save all files, and before that, let's also make a console here to check the execution of all the LifeCycle Hook methods. Let's save all the files. You can use Ctrl+Shift+P to save all the files, or you can also use the shorthand commands. So let's open the browser, and now you can see that first the ngAfterViewInit executed, and then the ngAfterViewChecked executed and checked the value whether it's changed or not. So it's saying that the value is changed from undefined to AfterViewChild. So let me add a spaces here, and let's save it again. Now you can see here that, let me maximize it a little bit, and the value changed from undefined to AfterView changed. So the method was written in parent component to check the changed value. So whenever I make any changes in child component, the same will get reflected using this ng LifeCycle Hook method. So let's type anything 1, 2, 3, or whatever you can do with this within this input box. The same will get reflected. So you can see here that the LifeCycle Hook methods ngAfterViewChecked has been checking for the every value changed. So we saw that ngAfterViewInit respond after Angular initialize the component, and ngAfterViewChecked respond after Angular check the component's view. Also, with the help of @viewChild and @viewChildren decorators, we can communicate with our child component, and also with their help we can execute our ng LifeCycle Hook methods. The same way we can also execute ngAfterContentInit and ngAfterContentChecked LifeCycle Hook method. They worked a little bit similar to the previous LifeCycle Hook method we just discussed. Instead of reading the component template, ngAfterContentInit respond after Angular projected external content into the component's view or into the view that a directive is in. It called once after the first ngDoCheckHook method executed. and ngAfterContentChecked respond after Angular checks the content projected into the directive or component. It called after ngAfterContentInit and every subsequent ngDoCheckHook methods. So these lifecycle hook methods use @contentChild and @contentChildren, which used to communicate between the parent and child. Both fetch the first matched or all child element which are projected into given component from the parent component. They include only element found within ngContent, whereas in our previous lifecycle hook method we discussed viewChild and viewChildren used to fetch the matched element from the child view template directly to the component, whereas @contentChild and @contentChildren fetch the element which are projected into given component, and this is the only major difference between. So we will do a practical session and I will show you what is the difference between them with a practical session. So let's open a Visual Studio Code and see a practical session with this lifecycle hook method. So as we created two components, parent and child, for after view, let's also create the two component, parent and child component, for after content. And you already know that after content lifecycle hook methods executed after the content is loaded and after view is executed after the view is loaded. So first of all, let's create two component. First, like after content child and also create after content parent. Now let's close these files, and first of all let's open the after content child, and using the same way we did with the after view components, let's rename it after content child, and let's open its source file. And like we created a local variable, let's also create it here, like name, and give him a name like after content child, and also create another method which will return a list of objects. So instead of this method, let's remove it and create get employees and return a list of employees. Okay, so we return the three objects Jack, Mark and Smith from this, the same way we did with the after view. And now let's open after content parent. So first of all let's change its name to after content parent, and now let's open its source file. And first of all we need to implement two lifecycle hook methods here. After content init and after content checked, and also we need to import this from Angular core. Now let's create their methods here. And create console.log here and print their name. And to fetch the properties and methods from child component, here we need to use @child content child, and which we also need to import from Angular core. And here we need to pass the class name of our child component, and we need to create an object whose type is of after content child component, and let's also import it from the component. And the same way, let's also create content children and create its object also. And let's import it as well, content and it should be of query list type. Now we also need to import this query list from Angular core, and now here we can, let's also write console.log, and within the console.log this dot content child dot we can access name and get employee, whereas get employee is returning a list, then we cannot access it here, so we have to access name here. So also using the same way, if we would like to get all the methods, all the properties from child component, we have to use this content children. So now let's create a loop here, this dot content children dot for each, and create a arrow function here, and you can fetch the values like x dot name, and again x dot get employee dot for each. Let's create an arrow function here and print all the values received from this method get employee element dot name. And the same way, let's also implement ngAfterContentChecked to check if there is any value changed or not. So for this, you already know that we have covered in our previous session. If this dot, so we need to declare a variable here, undefined, let's make it private, and use this variable to check the change value. This dot content child dot name, if it's not equal to, then there is something missing. Let me check what is the issue here. The semicolon is missing here, and also we need to close it like this. Okay, and now here console.log, and let's type value changed from this dot previous value to this dot content child dot name, and if it's not changed then update its value previous value to this dot content child dot name. Now the same way to change the value we have to implement a text box in our child component. So let's open child components HTML file and create a input type of text and use two-way binding ng model and pass it name. Now let's save all the files and here if you remember that we called the child component to a parent component, but here because we are using the @content child, then here we can fetch the matched element which are projected into the given component and which include only the element found in ngContent. Now here we have to use the ngContent instead of calling the same component. So in a parent component, instead of calling the name of the selector of this child component, we have to call ngContent. So why we used ngContent? Because ngContent placeholder is used for dynamic content, and when the template is passed, Angular will replace this placeholder tag with your content. So content child will work with this placeholder because the data is projected into this given component. Now the next step is we have to call this parent component in our app component. So let's copy its selector and open our app component and create a div here and pass the reference to the parent component. What parent component is expecting now? Now let me open this, and parent component is expecting a dynamic content to be loaded in this ngContent. So now here we are going to load this child component within this ngContent. So let's copy this selector and pass this child content within the parent content. So let's save all the file and open the browser, and you can check that here we have already loaded AfterView parent and whose AfterView child is loaded, and now here we have loaded AfterContent parent, and then within the AfterContent parent we have load the AfterContent child, and whenever we make any changes here, the same will get reflected using the LifeCycle Hook methods implemented in our parent component. Like if you notice, let me reload it again, you notice that first, if you remember the step and execution of all the LifeCycle Hook method, ngAfterContentInit will load before ngAfterViewInit. So first of all, ngAfterContentInit executed, then ngAfterContentChild is executed. Here you can see that first this one is executed and then this name is printed, and again the name is printed from this console, and then Jack, Mark and Smith is loaded from the child component of ngAfterContentInit, and then the ngAfterContentChecked method is executed, you can see here, and after that view is loaded. First the content is loaded and then the view is loaded, and the all the ng lifecycle methods of view is executed. Here you can see ngAfterViewInit is executed, and then ngAfterViewChecked is executed. So let me show you the slide again. So you can see the sequence. First the ngOnChange will execute, then the ngOnIt, then ngDoCheck, then ngAfterContentInit will be executed. But in our session we discuss the ngAfterViewInit before ngAfterContentInit, because I would like to show you the difference between ngAfterContentInit and ngAfterViewInit. If you're still confused with what is ngContent, then I will show you a basic example here. For example, let's add a component here. Let's rename it to add button. Let's create a component. I'm going to show you how ngContent will work. So here we have a button, and let's remove this and create a button here, and give me a class to button, and let's give him a name like click me. And right now we are not calling any method. Let's save it and copy its selector and open our app component file and paste it here. Now what happened when I save it? It will show click me. Now my requirement is to add two buttons with the same component. So here I'm going to reuse the component. So I'm creating another button. But now again you can see the text of all these buttons are click me and click me. I have no any option to change its name, but using ngContent I can change its name. So let me show you how we can do this. Let's open add button component, and instead of this hardcode value I will add here ngContent, and I am expecting a dynamic value for this button. So now let's open the app component again, and here I will pass add and here update. Let's save all the file, and you can see that I'm calling the same component but passing a dynamic content here. And the same thing happened with this, the after content parent component. So let me show you a real-time example here. Here you can see that we are passing this app after content child, and the same way you can also pass any component within this parent component, like you can pass xyz or any component which will work as a dynamic component. Now I hope you understand it. What is the difference between @content_child and @viewChild? Now the next question is why we have different lifecycle hook methods, whereas we can use the same thing within any of the component. The ngAfterViewInit executed whenever our view is loaded in DOM, and ngAfterContentInit is executed whenever our content is loaded. So the ngAfterContent is executed before ngAfterViewInit. So this is the major difference why we need to use @contentChild separately from @viewChild. So we have covered in this session 4 lifecycle hook methods. We also checked what is ngContent element and what is the difference between @viewChild and @contentChild. So if you like this video, please give a like, and also if you have still not subscribed to our channel, then please subscribe to it, and also please comment in case of any of your query in a comment box. You can also write to me at wavetutorial@outlook.com, and if you require the source code, you can check the Git repository link in description. My name is Naveen and thank you for watching this tutorial.